Welcome everybody to our review session for our midterm exam. So what we're really going to be doing today, and I am going to try and keep it fairly brief, is just kind of going over some of the expectations for the exam, the structure of the exam, and what you can expect to see when you get into it. So with the midterm exam coming up, I figured it'd be pretty helpful just to let you all know that we don't have anything else going on this week. Everything's dedicated to the exam. There's no lectures. There's not going to be a discussion forum. Your only goal this week in our class is to study for the exam and then to take the exam. So the goal of this review session is to help familiarize yourselves with the format and structure of the exam. And I put together a brief slideshow for you all that you can go through and just take a look, see some examples of how I score term IDs, the sort of questions you might expect if you were to get a multiple choice question on the exam. And so that it's really just going to be kind of going through and getting you all oriented to how you can use the study guide and how the exam is going to look in the Blackboard setting. So good luck to you all with your preparation for it. I'll say that up front, but I want to also use this as a segue into saying it doesn't do you any good to ask me questions after you've taken the exam. So if you have any questions about content, if you have any questions about how the exam is going to look, what my expectations are in grading, it's definitely something you want to reach out to me about in advance. This is something that it doesn't do you any good to take the exam, miss points on the question, and go, sorry to bother you, but I didn't really understand why I missed points on this. I thought I had it right. Well, it's better to, you're never bothering me when you email me. It's my job to answer student questions. It's what I do. And so I'm always open to those questions. I want to remind you to send them to me through direct email. Don't use the Blackboard messaging system because I'm just not nearly as responsive to it because it doesn't come up through my phone. So I, like all modern people, am glued to this thing, and if it pops up here, I'll address it right away, or at least once my wife stops glaring at me, I'll sneak away and answer your email. But it's always the easiest way to get in touch with me, and that is definitely something you want to take advantage of. It doesn't do you good to miss the points and then ask for clarification. Get that clarification up front so you do well on the exam. Pretty straightforward kind of stuff. So the test format, that's the first thing we're going to address. There's going to be 32 multiple choice questions, and those are worth half a point each for a total of 16 points. We're also going to have 6 term identification questions. These are 3-point questions that are worth, or 3-part questions that are worth 1.5 points each. So when you add it all up, that's a total of 9 points. So I do it this way because I suck at math. And the way it's listed in our course syllabus and our graded weight is that this exam is worth 25 points. So I've structured the questions to work out in a way to where the whole exam is worth 25 points. And that'll just help you keep track of your grade a little bit easier, and it's easier for me to tally at the end of the semester. So the first things you're going to encounter are multiple choice questions, and I should say they could be multiple choice or true false. I look at true false as just being a more limited multiple choice. You only have to pick between 2 instead of 4. But these are real straightforward. I don't have a whole lot to say about this. You all probably have been taking multiple choice exams for as long as you've been in school. And really, these questions are designed to see if you've engaged with the reading, engaged with the lecture materials, and had a general understanding of the content within those lectures and readings. So I can say honestly that from our class, I can count probably on one hand the number of content-related emails I've gotten this semester. My assumption is that you're reading the textbook, you're reading my lectures, and you're understanding what it is that I'm saying. If that's not the case, you definitely want to start reaching out a little more and get a little clarity. But that's what I'm testing for with those multiple choice questions. They don't really require a whole lot of analytical work. It's not like you're going to have to sit and scratch your head thinking about it. You either kind of know the material or you don't there. But it does help me ensure that we're covering the range of topics that we need. That we need to kind of get in on this exam. That's what multiple choice is really for. I can't ask you an essay question or a term ID, a written out question about every bit of material we've covered in the semester. So to see if you've engaged with all of it and understood all of it, that's what the multiple choice questions are for. And I've given you a few examples there in our slideshow of what you can kind of expect to see with our multiple choice or true-false questions. And I just took an example, kind of pulled it randomly off the top of my head. And this is what they'll tend to look like when you get into the exam. It'll say, the conquests of blank in the Mesopotamian region led to the establishment of the Akkadian Empire. And then I've given you 4 choices: Nebuchadnezzar, Sargon the Great, Alexander the Great, or Hammurabi. And of course, if you were trying to answer that one correctly, you would pick B, Sargon the Great, because he is the one whose conquests really sort of consolidated the Akkadian people into an empire, and then he went on those expansive reigns of conquest. So that would be the correct answer there. You select B, and you get on with your life. Now, I've taken that same question and I turned it into a true or false question. The conquests of Sargon the Great in the Mesopotamian region led to the establishment of the Akkadian Empire. True or false? You would answer true. But if I wrote, the conquests of Alexander the Great in the Mesopotamian region led to the establishment of the Akkadian Empire, you would then pick false. I might mix something else up about the wording there. I could say something to the effect of, the conquests of Sargon the Great in the Aegean region led to the establishment of the Akkadian Empire. That would also make it false. Or I might say the conquests of Sargon the Great in the Mesopotamian region led to the establishment of the Ptolemaic dynasty. And of course, you're going to pick false again. And so with those true or false ones, the language there is always going to be kind of such so that you have to read the entirety of the question. You have to make sure that every statement being made there is true. You don't want to try and guess what it is that I'm trying to test you for there. You want to just read that entire statement, make sure the whole statement is true, and if it is, then you go with true, and if any part of it is false, you pick false. Again, I don't want to beat a dead horse on multiple choice and true false because, frankly, I don't perceive that being all that unique or I guess, shocking to anybody when they get into the exam. Like I said, you've mostly been taking those types of exams your whole lives. So, the term identification section is something I want to address. This is the written portion of your exam. And by the time I get done with this lecture video, and I said it in my PowerPoint slide as well, I want to say at least 5 times in different areas of our course, you are not allowed to answer these questions in bullet point form. This is fulfilling the writing requirement set out by the university for this class. If you don't write it, you're not going to get credit. If you don't answer this in prose form, you are not going to get credit. You need to have complete sentences, full with punctuation, capitalized beginnings of the sentences, capitalized place names and people's names, articles and conjunctions, basically real writing. Now, I'm not a stickler. I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, technically you use the plural when you should have used the singular. No, you don't get points. I'm not an English professor. Now, I do demand that you put some time and thought into these answers, and I will knock points off if your language is unintelligible. If I don't know what it is you're trying to say, or if you by accident say the wrong thing because your language use is incorrect, you're going to lose points on that. But I'm not checking for grammar and punctuation. However, you cannot just go, the time period was, and then drop a line and go, Sargon the Great did. And then it's important because they have to be seamlessly woven together into like a paragraph. And that's about what I expect. I expect 2 to 3 sentences in response to these term identifications. But all right, here's time number 2. Do not answer in bullet point form. Do not put a list. It must be written in prose form to get credit. So, all right, keep track. That's 2. Now, let's talk about the actual questions themselves, what these are all about. I will start by saying the majority of students at UHD, since I've come here, I think I'm in year 5 now, this is where the majority of students lose points on my exams. It's not because I'm trying to be an ogre. It's not because I'm grading super hard. I find these term identifications are a lot better than essays. When I give you a timed exam and I say, all right, now write a big essay about the development of agriculture in Mesopotamia, something like that. What I tend to get is 3 to 4 paragraphs of fluff, and there's about 6 sentences total in the whole thing that maybe have some value or meaning. And so I don't find them to be very effective, and I understand why that is. How are you supposed to sit here and write this eloquent essay on the fly? I write 3-page book reviews for my job as an intellectual or a scholar. I write 30-page articles, but nobody says, hey, all right, Dr. Davy, you got to do it in the next 5 minutes. I don't find that to be a very practical way of testing. It's to write a big, long, eloquent essay. I find most of it is it's an exercise in futility. And so I use these term IDs as a way of fulfilling our writing requirements rather than using essays. So here it is, number 3. That's why you cannot use bullet points. You cannot put lists. It has to be written. But each one of these term identification questions is worth a 1.5, and each half point represents one aspect of the question that you need to answer. The term identification questions require you to tell me in your own words, and I want to stress that, in your own words. Do not copy anything off the internet. Do not copy anything out of your textbook. Do not copy words directly off my PowerPoint slide, because if you do, you will get a 0 for the entire exam. That is cheating. You're not allowed to use any resources during the exam. That's something I'll get to at the end of my lecture. I saved the fire and brimstone for the end. But in your own words, you need to tell me the 3 key components that I'm asking for here about the term you're seeing in the exam. The first point is related to what I generally call context. What I'm asking you to do with the context point is to give me the time period and location of the term. Sometimes the time period is narrowed down to a specific year, whereas other terms may require you to give me a range of years. So for example, the one I use in our PowerPoint slide review, I take the Edict of Milan, something we encountered in our discussion of Constantine and the shift towards Christianity in the Roman Empire. Now, the Edict of Milan, if you see that as a term on the exam, that happened in 1 year. It wasn't this ongoing 5 to 7 to 12 to 100-year process. It happened in 313 CE. So on the exam, my expectation is if you see Edict of Milan as a term ID, you need to narrow it down to 313 CE. And you have to use, because we're going from BC into, sorry, I did it myself. Since we're going from BCE into CE, before Common Era to Common Era, and by the way, I'm not taking points off if you do just BC and AD. I get it. That's what most people are used to. I'm just trying to stick to the proper historian terms these days. But you've got to tell me for Edict of Milan, it's 313 CE. That's specific. However, if you see something like the Roman Empire, you need to tell me that this was in existence from 27 CE to 476 CE. That's when that era of the Roman Empire exists. Now, you may be able to get away with, and I often tell people, do your best, take a guess, and get as close as you possibly can. But I might give you credit if you say something to the effect of, in the early 1st century Common Era to the late 5th century. You'd be close enough there to where I probably would give you points. But as a general rule, you don't want to test how lenient I'm going to be. If you know the specific dates, use the specific dates. And that is true of everything about these term IDs. Give me as much detail as you can. Be as specific as you can. If you go overboard, you don't ever lose points for that. But if I find it to be an underwhelming answer, you will lose points for that. So just make sure you're paying attention to that. So if you were to see for location, it's the same thing. Some of these things are real specific to one spot in the world. Other things kind of happened over a broader area. So if you see the Babylonian Empire, you've got to tell me that they are basically positioned in southern Mesopotamia along the Euphrates River. That'd be good enough to get you the location. But if I say late Bronze Age collapse as the term ID, you need to tell me that it happened over the whole Near East and in the Mediterranean basin as well. It's a much broader area. So that's what the context point is all about. You need to give me the time and the location. That's what I'm looking for there. Now, for the detailed identification, that's the second point that you need to get for these term IDs. Here is where you explain what the term is all about. You give me the actual identification. This is where you're telling me what it is. So when we go back to some of those previously used examples, we could take the late Bronze Age collapse. My expectation is that you're going to be able to say something to the effect of the Bronze Age collapse was a 50-year period in which most of the large territorial states and empires experienced a rapid decline and collapse. This was likely driven by new military technologies and environmental changes. That is how you get points for the detailed ID. You will not get points if you say it was a time when many kingdoms collapsed, or the late Bronze Age collapse was an event that impacted a lot of kingdoms. You're not going to get points for a lack of specificity. If you're lacking those key details, you will not get points for the detailed ID section of the term ID. And then the third point that you need to have as part of these term IDs is significance or importance. Why do we care? Not everything that happened in the past is worthy of examination in a history class, especially not a broader course like this. And so these term IDs are all going to have a larger point of significance. Again, going back to that last example, the late Bronze Age collapse. There you would say something to the effect of, it drastically altered the landscape of the Near East, North Africa, and Aegean Sea. It created space for the rise of new empires while simultaneously witnessing the end of the largest extant states. In other words, what you're saying is, and that might be a little verbose or long-winded for you, you can say it more simply, but really what I'm looking for here is you're telling me why it's important. The old kingdoms that were doing really well, the old empires and territorial states died off in this collapse, and then it created space for new ones to rise up. You could also find another point of significance. You could say something to the effect of, the late Bronze Age collapse highlights how dependent pre-industrial states were on climatic and environmental stability. So you do have options as to how you choose to look at this. Why it's important to one person might be different than, and there's multiple points of significance about most of the things we've looked at. However, you can't go, and I see this a lot, it was important because it ended a lot of empires. Okay, you're not being specific enough. Empires come and go all the time. You need to be a little bit more detailed. You can't say the late Bronze Age collapse was important because it impacted societies. Everything impacts societies. When a cat does something funny and people post a video of it on YouTube, technically that has an impact on our society. Doesn't make it worthy of a historical, sort of investigation. And so really, it's important for you to be as specific as possible, and always, obviously, I've assigned reading material for a reason. I've chosen to talk about certain things in the lectures for a reason. So if you're sticking as closely as you can to our course material, and you give the point of significance that the textbook gives, or that I gave in my lecture, you're far more likely to stay on the right path and get points for that. So, in the PowerPoint slide, I've given you an example of how I how I go about grading these things. I will give partial credit. So if you get the context points right, I'll give credit for that, even if you get the other two aspects wrong. Although I'll generally say it's unlikely that you're going to get the identification wrong and the significance right, because if you don't know what it is, you generally don't know why it's important. So I know people are okay at memorizing dates and places, and so a lot of people tend to get the context point, but then they can't really remember what the actual term was all about. So I will always be going through and grading them in these different sections of the term ID independently, so you can get partial points. But remember, all term IDs, this is number 3, I think, number 3 here. All term IDs must be answered in prose form. Any lists or bulleted information will receive 0 credit, so just please be aware of that. I don't want people getting points totally knocked off when they knew what they were talking about, they just didn't feel like writing sentences. So there are some things, sorry I dropped my pen, some things to be aware of, just sort of general rules to how an exam works in Blackboard. First off, once you start this test, you have to finish it within 1 hour and 30 minutes. That's the time window I've provided for you all. You will not be able to reopen the exam window once you've closed it. You have to finish it in a single sitting. You can skip over questions and go back to them later, so you can take advantage of that if you run into one that's kind of stumping you. Just remember that you physically have to go back and find that question again and answer it once you've skipped over it. Don't leave anything blank or unanswered on these exams, because you never lose points for guessing on one of my exams. I know some teachers do structure it that way. I don't care. If you somehow guess it right or divine it, or you're struck by divine wisdom, hey, give it a shot and try and get some points. Even if your answer is nonsense, it's better than no answer at all. You might as well take a shot. So the questions are going to appear in random order. So you could get a multiple choice question in one, and then all of a sudden get hit with a term ID and then back to multiple choice. It's set to random, so there's no guarantee the order in which these things are going to appear. All right, I'm ready to wrap this thing up, but I do want to point out some common pitfalls that I see in these exams. First and foremost, do not plagiarize. You are not allowed to have any resources of any kind open during this exam. I don't use Respondus Lockdown Browser. I don't use any of those other testing equipments or online proctoring things. I'll be honest, most of it is that I don't really understand technology and I don't want to learn about them. Number two is that the few that I have engaged with, seeing some necessity for what they do in the class, I find they don't work very well. And also, I think just maybe being a little old school, I find it a gross invasion of people's privacy to be forced to sit in front of a camera while they're taking an exam for a university class. So I have feelings about all that, and I'm sure you probably don't care what they are. At the end of the day, I just use Blackboard's Examination Center. That's how I do it. But I have little red herrings built into this exam. I know when you're looking at my notes to answer a question at my lectures. I know when you're taking things directly out of the textbook because you're sitting there looking at it at that time. So just don't do this. You are going to get an automatic 0 if you plagiarize. Avoid general blanket statements. Be as specific as possible. Make sure you're putting those term IDs into prose form, not bullet point form. Make sure you're putting them into prose form, not bullet point form. There, that's 5 times I've given you. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. I'm always available by email. We can talk by Zoom if you need me to do that. So I'm always available and happy to talk. Be confident. When you're going into the exam, don't be nervous about getting points wrong. Be confident you're going to get points right. They have done actual studies on this, and people who did no more preparation than the next guy, just thinking they were ready, tend to do better on exams. So study hard, study smart. If you need anything from me, make me earn my paycheck and reach out, and good luck to you all. Take care.